I always talk about what happened last week.
Welcome to Laughter for All. It's the podcast with Comedian Nazareth.
Hello, 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 and welcome to another episode of the Laughter for All podcast. I'm comedian Nazareth here in the studios in Corona, California. Yes, for the first time in living in Corona, I'm really embarrassed to tell people where I'm from. I'm not embarrassed, I'm actually scared to tell them. People are really, really scared. I can tell you that because I flew 8 times in the last 4 days. So people are scared. People are putting masks on and all that. So, but let me tell you what happened last week. I was in at the NRB, the National Religious Broadcasters in Nashville at the Gaylord Resort, and it was wonderful. We had some encouragement from, I think, one the chairman of the NRB. She was saying that you know what, if you're in ministry, you are gonna get persecuted a little bit, so get ready for that and be prepared for that. But and then William Barr, the Attorney General, came and spoke, and he was very optimistic about what's going on in our nation. So, hey, I'm not political. I don't know what's going on in the political scene, but that's always I love people who are encouraging and happening. And then uh, is the highest concentration of PhDs in the United States because they work at the Los Alamos lab. I can tell you, I was glowing. I was literally glowing. That's how you can feel the nuclear things in your body. But anyway, we did a gala, a fundraising gala, and they were so happy. They sold more tickets than they thought, and they booked me back on the spot. So I'm always happy when the clients are very happy. But anyway, so this is what happened last week. Next week, Friday and Saturday. Friday, I'm doing a church, a small church. Laughter for All. Sometimes we go to churches that cannot never afford a comedian, and we're doing a big Laughter for All for them. For their event. Then Saturday, we're raising money for missions at New Covenant in Fresno. Sunday, I leave to Maui for the Increase conference for a week, then come back and I have a men's conference next Saturday. We'll talk about it later. But anyway, I'm so excited. I did not think I could get this guy in the studio. I did not. So I'm really amazed. And so his name is Pete Mcgowen. Pete is one of the most creative people I know. And there's only two people I think of is Phil Cook and Pete Mcgowen. And he's here with us. He took the time to be here. So welcome to the show, Pete. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Wonderful. Now, uh, what keeps you creative? What keeps you creative?
Man, that's an interesting, broad question. I think inherently, my Creator, God, keeps me creative. I believe God made everyone creative. It's just to what degree are we able to have that freedom to express it. But you put any kid in a room with crayons, you'll see really quickly that they're creative. And I think there's a whole separate dialogue and story about creativity and design. But I think most people are creative. It's just whether they feel the freedom to express that creativity.
Now, is this where you at right now? Is this something you dreamed of? Is this something like when you were little? Where were you born?
So I was actually born in Downey, California.
Downey,
Yeah,
California.
my dad was in the Army though, and shortly thereafter, like by the time before I was one, we started moving around a lot as my dad got stationed in different places, and I spent till I was 12 years old, primarily overseas in Europe, Germany. So
Ah,
9 years in Germany. So I kind of grew up abroad.
were you in Bavaria?
Bavaria. Yeah.
Yes, because every year I go to Bavaria and do the army post.
Oh,
And,
yeah.
have you seen the tower where Hitler used to stand and talk to people?
Yeah, in Nuremberg. The
Nuremberg and
Nuremberg
Vilsik.
Field, yeah.
Yes, I go there every year. I love. That's awesome. And when did you come here and stayed here in California?
So we moved to California in 1984. Yeah.
84.
Yeah.
That's when I came to the States.
Oh.
And did you go to college here in California?
I did. I graduated and I ended up at Cal Poly.
What did you study?
So I started off as an architectural major,
Uh-huh.
but then luckily, in the early '90s, during the dot-com boom, I got swayed into technology.
I know you had your own tech company. Sure, it's called what?
Thinkware.
What?
Thinkware.
Thinkware.
Yeah, Doug Hewson actually started it. So he got me my first job out of high school with IBM, and then when he left and started Thinkware, I went to work for him. And then when he went into the ministry full-time, kind of.
And he's a pastor now at Crossroads, where you serve as a board director.
You know what?
So now
I
you're
was
his boss.
for a long time, for about 10 years, but I rolled off a few years ago.
But you were his boss for.
I was never really his boss.
So you were in that big wave of the Silicon Valley, all this .coms, and then what made you change to start Plain Joe Studios, which does a lot of creative work?
Yeah. So actually, pretty. Gosh, that's a deep question to ask really quickly.
Well, go for it.
So basically, I was doing the IT stuff, the outsourced IT managed services, and did really well with that. And kind of even rewinding back to my story, when I met Doug Hewson, I was in high school. In 1984, when we landed here in Corona, my dad actually left our family. He abandoned us.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And it actually ended up working out really good.
Okay.
So he was actually a really bad guy. He was not a very good man. Have you not heard this story before?
No, I would love to hear it,
Yeah.
because it could encourage some mom or some.
Yeah. So if for some reason I thought I'd shared this with you before, but
No.
he was. If you ever seen the movie Catch Me If You Can.
Okay.
That totally could have been my dad. He was like a professional con man, which is why we moved around a lot as kids. He would set up cons and leave. But when we landed in Corona in 1984, shortly thereafter, he actually left us. And my mom, she's from Vietnam. She didn't even have a high school education, and it was all she could do was worked as hard as she could to keep us together. And I remember she would go to work here in Corona. We had all the old lemon groves. She'd go into the lemon groves picking lemons for the day laborers, come home with her hands bleeding. I remember one day she's like, if we can just keep the house, we'll be okay. So I went from relatively 16 years old. We were on welfare for a little bit, and we pull ourselves up by the bootstraps. My mom worked really hard. Got through high school, went on to college. I got into IT, made a lot of money. I mean, and Doug taught me early on about diversification. It wasn't just about going and buying, a fancy car, but what was it like to be able to invest. My mom always said, when we were, really poor, I was like, if we only had $1 million, we'd be okay. And she would laugh at me and she goes, no, if you can't manage a little money, you can't manage a lot. So she really challenged me between her and Doug. What would I do with the money that I did start making? And I ended up investing a lot of it, and everything from real estate to stock markets to different types of things, rather than just spending it on fun things. And as God would kind of lay things out, I was set. By the time I was 26, I was kind of on a trajectory to be financially independent by the time I was 30, and I thought I had kind of conquered the world.
And were you?
Yeah.
Were you at 26? Yeah. What is it like?
Good.
What is it like to be to be at an age? And this, I know a lot of people. Some have money. A lot of my fans either have or don't have. What is it like to be independently wealthy? Which means. Yeah. What is it like? How does it feel? What do you?
Well, I think it's all relative, and I wouldn't say we were wealthy. I think a friend of mine once said when we were in high school, the less you have, the freer you are. So the idea of not being in debt gave me a lot of freedom. The idea that if I didn't have all these car payments, I didn't have all these monthly bills added up, I could go to Europe for a month or 2 months and not worry about doing things. So it wasn't even so much that I was wealthy and had a lot of money, as I just had a lot of freedom. And I wasn't tethered to do a lot of things a lot of mistakes my other friends had gone down. And between my mom, Doug Hewson, and a few other people that really taught me good lessons, I was able to have that freedom. So, but even today, I wouldn't call myself wealthy. I mean, you look at the wealth in this world that the top 1% have. I mean, I think everyone in America is pretty wealthy when you compare. I mean, if you have a refrigerator, you have running water, you have a toilet, you have an air conditioner, you're better off than 95% of the rest of the
I'm
world.
from New Orleans. We don't need most of these things, but
Yes.
where's mom now?
Yeah, so she lives with my brother Ed. So I'm one of three brothers, and the middle brother in kind of a good Asian style. We take care of our parents.
Are you taking care of her well?
Try to.
Of course,
She's an
she
incredibly
worked hard.
independent woman, but yeah, she definitely was. When we were growing up, she was always like, "I'm gonna live with my boys." So.
And when did you meet your wife, Jennifer?
So I actually met her in high school. Yeah, that's kind of a funny story. Anyways, but I have another friend who pointed her out, and she was beautiful and way out of my league, and I stalked her, and she wouldn't have anything to do with me. So, but we were friends in high school, and then later on in college, she'd actually finished college. I got the guts and the nerve to ask her out on a date, and that was a whole funny story.
How long you guys been married?
We've been married 22 years now. Yeah,
22 years.
Yeah, we have 3 kids, and
Now you're the IT originally creative guy. What is she like? Does she work?
She's a stay-at-home mom now. Originally, she graduated with a degree in psychology and early childhood development, and she was an educator, a teacher before we had kids. But that was even like when we got married, though. I remember early discussions. She grew up in a household with a working mom, working dad, and we just made a decision early on that, if we had kids, we wanted her to stay at home. And if it meant that we lived in an apartment, as long as we were debt-free, that was something we were kind of focused on.
See, I'm big on that. My wife, Maha, never worked. I mean, she worked from home part-time, but, she doesn't have to, but she stays home. Even when we didn't have any money, she still stayed home. So now what would be, okay.
But to be clear, she works nonstop.
Yes, of course.
It's like, I think she was mentioning the other day, I think she gets a break from 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. when I'm home getting the kids to bed.
See, ever since I met you, you always have things in control and order. What is the typical argument between you and Jennifer? What would it be, like a recurring argument?
So it's so are you familiar with the Enneagram, right? Are you familiar with the Enneagram?
Enneagram.
Yeah, the Enneagram, like the 9 personality types. Have you not heard of that?
I've done those tests. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a little bit more than a test. I got exposed to it about 10 years ago through Pete Scazzaro in Emotionally Healthy Spirituality or Emotionally Healthy Discipleship. And I've done a lot of different personality tests and different things, and they're really useful just to kind of diagnose things. But I'm a big fan of the Enneagram because it gets behind your motives for things. And understanding, kind of your greatest strengths, also your greatest weakness. So in that, there's these 9 personality types. And I believe there are some spiritual applications to it, fruits of the Spirit kind of being one of them. But the whole idea that there's this kind of teeter-totter between, grace or like peace and sin or whatever, and anger, basically. Peace and anger kind of are teeter-totter between each other. And in the Enneagram type, there's 9 different types. My type is that of what's called a challenger. And basically, it's what gets behind my motivation for things. And I'm always up for a challenge. When people say you can't do something, I'm usually the first one to not be bright enough to be like, oh, maybe I should do it. I'm like, there has to be a way. Come on, there has to be a way. And there's a lot of that Enneagram type of 8 has been identified with like Martin Luther King, was it Winston Churchill, a lot of other kind of famous people who've like taken on challenges. But it's also seen and identified with like Adolf Hitler, where he took a challenge of Nazi Germany being under the Great Depression and used it for evil. And so that's my thing is, so I can get into arguments very quickly. I have fun getting into arguments and just debating with people, whether I win or lose. It's just fun for me to kind of hash it out.
It's a challenge.
Yeah, and it's fun, and I don't get my feelings hurt. My wife, her personality type sits on the top of the Enneagram, that of a 9, which is a peacemaker, and so
that's what I am.
Yeah, so she's easy to get along with. She can identify with just about everyone in the room. I walk in, I'm pretty oblivious. I lack tact. I have to be very I have to force myself to try and be aware of things. But she's very good at just being like aware of everything around her. But the problem with that is a lot of times she won't always say what she wants or declare those types of things. So for the first 10 years of our marriage, like we never had fights. I thought it was great.
Yes,
but really she was really frustrated. So it wasn't until actually later on that that we were both healthier, and I would make it safer for her to eat. Well, even now, I think it's hard because I'm very like Was that bother you? And I'll just say it and get it off my chest.
Now, how can people get into that Enneagram test? Where can they get it?
So
And is it expensive?
a couple of things. There are free tests, and there's a thing that you get what you pay for. But ultimately, it's not about the tests. It really is about there's a few, and actually Sandals Church locally, Pastor Matt Brown does a great.
Yes.
He does a great series on it, and then not only does he have a great message on it, each of the 9 types. Afterwards, on the Monday morning, they do the debrief. Well, he'll kind of have a conversation with staff members or different key volunteers on the types. But the most powerful thing about the Enneagram, it's not about taking a test, because you can trick a test. You can make it say or sound any way you want.
Right.
But it's really a tool for you to read through and see what resonates with yourself, and help you understand your own motives and what do you do in health or in stress. Then the other helpful thing is when you are dealing with somebody else and they understand the same kind of constructs, or they are able to self-identify, that helps equip me to be able to have a dialogue. So one of my stories within our design studios, I remember I got a call from a client one day, and see, I think this is funny. It's not funny because someone's in tears, but
that's fine. It's called Laughter for All podcast.
Yeah,
for a reason.
but someone calls up and they gave me some great feedback. They're like, "Oh, Pete, it was great. You guys hit it out of the park. All these. Next time, if you guys did this a little bit differently, we think it'd be even better." So I walk in the room, and the person who dealt with the project wasn't there. Right, but I walk into a project management room with all the producers in there, and there was just 2 people in there, and so again, they weren't related to the project. But I was just kind of excited, so I tell them about this call. I'm like, "Oh yeah, it's so great!" And in my mind, I'm like, telling them that everything went great. But if we just change it this time, next time, it'd be even better. And I walk out, and about 10, 15 minutes later, one of the people come to me and go, "Pete, thank you just for being clear, concise. Now I know what the win is. It's so awesome." And I'm like patting myself on the back. I'm like, "Oh, yeah, great. I'm such a great leader." And about 15 minutes later, the other person comes in the room, like in tears, like, "Am I going to get fired? Did I mess something up?" They were thinking I was being passive aggressive. And I'm like, no, but it was really what it came down to was they're 2 different personality types. One of them, like, really, they're they enjoy criticism. You believe that there are certain people. I'm one of them who criticism makes us better, makes us stronger. Everything can be good. There's other people, an Enneagram type 1 who's a perfectionist. Their own inner voice they're harder on themselves than anyone ever needs to be. And they're going to be harder on themselves.
Is that the peacemakers?
It's a perfectionist.
Perfectionist,
yeah.
yeah.
And they're able to, and if everything isn't just right, so even just the space that they were in, no matter what I said, because it wasn't just right, they just beat themselves up over it. So that opened me up to realizing I just have to be careful with how I communicate, especially when there's criticism, and it's just my role in the company, because I have that leadership role. I just have to be more ginger about it if I want a place that's safe for people to.
Tell me about the Planger. So you left the IT business, you worked for Johnson Johnson, all these companies, and then you left it, and then when did you guys start Plain Joe?
Yeah, so we actually got started in October of 2001, just after 9/11. And it got started.
That's not good to start right after.
That's my joke. Is usually a great time to start a business. Just after 9/11. No, actually, but that was the whole idea, is that the world was going to hell in a handbasket. And we were sitting in a restaurant one night with Mike Foster, my brother Mel, and myself. And Mike just asked this question, like, why, if we told the server right now that we were Christians, unless they were a believer, the first thoughts in their head will have nothing to do with who Jesus is. It's going to be like, great, cheap tip, homophobic, judgmental, all these things. They know more for what we're against than what we're for. Why is that? And my brother Mel was just, he had spent about 10 years with the Walt Disney Company, and he was just very quick to be like, yeah, that's because the church has forgotten how to tell its story. It thinks story is told one day a week on a Sunday morning. But the reality is that story is told 7 days a week. Story is told, by everyone all the time. Walt Disney Company, there's a saying that everything speaks. And that's what we started this company around, is this idea of helping people tell their story beyond just the normal traditional words or oral or written traditions, but how do we actually help people tell their story using design? And so there's kind of 3 areas of design that we look at that are pretty broad. But when we look at modern branding, you look at something like Starbucks or Tesla or anything like that they don't use traditional marketing advertising vehicles. What do? It really falls down to these 3 kind of brand experiences. What we say is, branding or design that walks away with people, kind of like brand communications. But it's not about logos, fonts, and colors. It really is about an emotional response. So how do you feel when you say laughter for all? How do you feel when you say Christian, when you say Disney, Apple, Nike, Starbucks? That emotional response really is what the brand is. The second area is design that doesn't walk away with people, what we call spatial storytelling. And we're actually a licensed architectural firm, but creating spaces. So you've been to Crossroads in that environment, or whether it's children's museums or visitor centers, guest experience things, being intentional about those spaces and how people feel after they, enter into one of those. And then the third one is design that people interact with. And that gets into web media, mobile app development, social media campaigns and stuff. But what we look at is not so much what are the tactical check boxes, but what are the emotional responses that people have. And when you look at an organization like Chick-fil-A, what sets them apart from like McDonald's, they're very much about the overall holistic experience, the guest experience, and that's why they say, it's my pleasure.
Do companies choose that emotional response before the branding or after? Or do you guys help them find that?
So it's either way. So sometimes we have clients that really are pretty attuned with who they are and what they're doing. They just need help broadening that vocabulary to express it. So we do work with the Walt Disney Company. They're very clear on what their mission is and how they're working. They want to make, help families make memories, help people make memories, and everything falls into that. But then there are organizations that don't work with, understand that, or they've been able to do their job, but it's hard to see the forest from the trees. So we'll take them through a process to try and uncover that truth behind them and understand what their story is.
So who's your client, your typical average client? Who would that be?
I'm not sure we have a typical average client. We actually very intentionally, this talks about creativity, because we've been doing this for over 18 years now, and about every 5 years we've done our own internal strategic planning. We'll bring an outsider in to help us kind of look at things, and almost every time they pretty much tell us, man, you guys would make so much money if you got rid of these 80% of the clients that are just distractions and focused on these 20% of the clients that you're making. The whole 80-20 principle. 80% of your money comes from 20% of your clients.
Right.
The problem is I don't think we could serve those clients well if we didn't have the diversity and divergent thinking that comes from all the other clients. But by nature of our business, what helps keep us creative, about 2/3 of our workload is going to be nonprofit related, a lot of causes, and that's everything from missions organizations, a lot of churches, Children's Hunger Fund, organizations that deal with human trafficking, working with disabled veterans or veterans that have served, first responders, everything like that, all the way through to we have about 1/3 of our clients are going to be for-profit clients that are aerospace clients or coffee shops, restaurants. Miguel's.
They keep you going because the nonprofits don't have a lot. So let's say someone has, he said, I have a vision from God, or I have this idea. I want to start this business, or I want to do this a nonprofit. I want to start a nonprofit. And if they're listening, they come to you, Pete. What would be your first advice to them, or what would be your advice to them?
Yeah. So I usually go through our process a little bit and just trying to understand everyone is unique, everyone is different. So even though it's kind of like having a recipe, even though I might have a recipe to cook with, if I go over to someone's house, they may not have, or they probably won't have the exact ingredients that I need. So the idea that I know how to cook, but then we have to adapt and know what recipes to pull together. But usually it starts with just trying to understand where people have come from, what their unique background is. And then kind of taking things through that storytelling process, which literally it's characters, plots, and settings. Characters, who's your target audience, who you're trying to engage them. Sometimes those characters are the people within your organization. The plots, actually mapping out intentionally, what is that pathway that they're going to go through, and do they end where you want them to land? And then the setting is understanding the environments that it happens, whether it's a physical or digital environment. And so we'll try and walk them through that.
And how long that process takes, from they come to you until they're running?
Yeah. So it's really it just depends. Again, being kind of a little bit different. We usually start everything. The minimum process is half a day just to sit down with us. And there are people who meet with us for half a day. Then they leave and they're equipped to kind of work better than they would have if they never met us to begin with. But then there are clients like Miguel's. Miguel's was one of our first 3 clients 18 years ago, and they're still clients today. And we're still able to help them, grow. And they're looking at expanding over the next few years. And we've had a broad range that we've been able to help them grow. There's this one aerospace client that we have. We took them from $50 million to $300 million, and grew quite a bit. But it's pretty exciting. But different clients have different applications. Right now, we're doing some work with Walt Disney Company and Pixar and stuff like that. It's dealing with a set of issues that haven't really been tackled before. But in the end, the way that we're approaching it, it's a storytelling solution. And within their organization, how do we help them tell stories? Because especially when you're dealing with fast-moving organizations where training is done via an oral tradition through mentors, which is really great. How do you actually use technology to leverage and accelerate that?
Well, technology have changed, and it's getting faster, and people's attention span is getting shorter and shorter. Is that good for your company or bad for your company? Is that how can you tell do you have to tell the story faster now? And
yeah. You know what? Honestly, I think there's certain principles. I think just talking about technology, that's a whole separate conversation we have. But I don't think it's an accident that the greatest storyteller of all time, when you look back, at how he told stories, sometimes they're very short. I think he would have been great on Twitter.
Jesus, yes.
Yeah, Jesus would. But the only time he ever wrote anything down, so he was an educated man. He was a scholar. He could read and write. The only time he wrote anything down, was in dirt, something that was temporary. He very well could have used technology and wrote paper to pen, whatever, and put words down. But I think it was not. I don't think it was an accident that he did not do that. And I think it let the gospel and the story be independent of technology as technology evolved. And really the gospel has been on the backbone and brought continuity to a lot of and creativity. When you look at the Renaissance, the greatest period of creativity that mankind has ever known, a lot of it was how do you express this timeless story and this message. So I believe it's our calling to use technology in a relevant way. That's what Jesus did 2,000 years ago. And so we continue to do that today. But I think definitely things are getting worse as far as attention spans. I think things are accelerating, but there's whole other dialogues we can have on that. But I think there's certain truths that are just
so how do you keep yourself fresh with that? And that's what I want to know. I told my fans and listeners, Pete's how do you keep things fresh and creative and knowing what's going on? Even at one point, I remember I came to you and said to help with the website, and you said, well, this color is big right now or stuff. How do you stay up to date with all that?
Well, some of it, and certain things like color theory really doesn't change that much. And I think certain colors are trendy. But this is something we talk to clients about, especially when we build space and they invest a lot of money into it. One of the core things that we believe timeless design is based in story. No one goes to Disneyland and says, man, this is 65 years old. Gosh, I mean, like Notre Dame, it's like, hundreds of years old. When you have a solid story, that's what allows things to come together. So, we're working with some clients now that are going on near almost 20 years that we designed stuff 20 years ago, and it still feels fresh. And people go like, oh, yeah, and it's because it's based in story. That is one of the key things. So, we just try to always go back to that idea of story. And it's so easy to put things onto this assembly line approach and forget the story. And you're so concerned about the tactical outcomes, you forget what the story is. And that's when things get stale. That's when things get stagnant. Anyways.
Do you guys keep, do you do a blog? Which blog do you read? Is there someone out there that you go, I need to know what this guy is writing, what he's saying, because he knows what or she knows what he's talking about?
Yeah, I have a pretty diverse thing. I definitely, there's certain authors I definitely like Simon Sinek is, he just released a new book called Infinite Game, which I think, and it talks about the paradigm thoughts and a lot of this stuff. Seth Godin's a great guy as well. There's a lot of pastors that I love to follow and read and keep up with too. But yeah, for me, and this actually speaks into creativity, I think, when you look at the 10 Commands, I think probably one of my favorite ones is to observe the Sabbath and to keep the Sabbath. The trick about Sabbath though is you really have to make sure you work the first part.
6 days.
Yeah, 6 days. And then take a break. And I think some people are confused with Sabbath and leisure, and they really don't know how to work, so they really don't know how to take time off. But those the whole thing of just working 80 hours a week and going nonstop, and the quickest way to do something is to stay at it and not taking those breaks. I think it really, it's hard to be creative in those times. I think inspiration comes at, different times, but I think your ability to kind of take breaks and rest, and whether it's a nap in the middle of the day or taking the day off, I think it's really important.
I know you're a great dad. You're very involved, and your daughter's doing great things. I haven't been following up the last few months, but what is your typical day? You get up in the morning. What happens with you? What time and what do you do first?
Yeah, due to the nature of my personality, my schedule is all over the place. Yeah, so regrettably, the beginning of 2020 has been a little bit nonstop. For the first 11 weeks, I've been on the road at least once or twice, 1 or 2 days a week for the first 11 weeks. So just over a week ago, I was in Australia. So that was, it was pretty different. So, and I'm bouncing back and forth. Just last week, I just got back. I was in Indianapolis and DC. So, it just depends. I need to make sure I try and get enough rest. But I would say when I am home, usually I try to get up and my kids they're all pretty much older now. So I try to make sure I'm up in time to, see them off to school and, spend a little bit of time breakfast with them. If I get to take them to school, I love to be able to do that. But usually my days, like in and going with phone calls and meetings by 8 o'clock. And usually my days when I am in Corona and when I am in town it's pretty much meetings. And those meetings can really just kind of vary. But then I'll try and be intentional about the time that I then get online to do emails. I try not to do emails just a little bit all day, every day. A few years ago, I pulled off of social media. I used to be on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook, and I would post.
You just pulled off.
Yeah. It was kind of like a drug addict, just kind of quitting cold turkey. Yeah. I went from one of my cousins one time was like, "My gosh, you post like 30 times a day," and I was like, and it was almost like a high. When you post something, you get 100 likes within the first 15 minutes. If I didn't get it, it'd be like, "Wait, what's going on here?" And then I just realized it just wasn't being productive for me, and it really wasn't helping me be creative. It was actually it was artificially giving me a fulfillment in areas that really didn't matter. My role in things, if I have time, I need to, I want to pour it into my family. I want to pour it into the team members that I get to work with. And it's really easy to get distracted by just what's keeping me busy. So I try not to be busy. But.
Now, how do you teach your kids to be creative? What do you do?
Oh man, I try to celebrate just having fun and divergent thinking, and letting them make mistakes. I think trying to make it feel like it's okay to fail. Although it is really hard because I can be so critical on things, and depending on their personality types, again, back to the Enneagram, I've learned that I have to treat my kids differently, and not preferential treatment or anything like that. I just need to know that, certain ones I can be a little bit more critical of, and they can take it a little bit differently, and the other ones I don't need to be as critical. I need to be more supporting in a coach type role, but yeah.
One time I was at your house, and your son's room looks like Star Wars.
That's
the
right.
The bed was like the Millennium Falcon. Right?
Yeah. It's kind of it's a little internet famous. It's made its round on Reddit and stuff. But yeah,
it did.
Yeah, and the quick story there is for the first for about 8 years he shared a room with his sister. So he had yellow seashells and curtains and everything. And we added on to the house. But we had when we had our third kid, he moved in and shared a room with his sister. So we actually built him a room. And as a part of that, when he was 10 years old, I'm like, I'll build you any room you want. As long as it's the room I always wanted. No, and I always wanted a Star Wars room, and luckily he did too. And I remember when we built it, we used a lot of what we call found items, parts that were laying around my workshop and everything. But since we do theme fabrication, I did have access to quite a few talented people. But yeah, if you Google search Millennium Falcon Star Wars bedroom, it'll pretty much come up. And it's been, it's the highest form of flattery. A lot of people have copied it, including Pottery Barn.
Oh, really?
At least that's what
awesome.
Certain people told me.
Well, I would believe it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, your daughter's how old now?
She's 19 and she's at Concordia.
Concordia. What is she studying?
She is a theater major, and as well as I think a minor in business. But yeah, so
wow.
Yeah.
Now, you have how many employees you have at Plain Joe?
It's kind of hard to keep track a little bit, but just over 100, I believe.
Over 100.
Yeah.
But they're all under 30, right? Are they?
No. Yeah, it's that divergent thinking. No, we have some responsible people. No, we have people who are older as well.
You know, it's funny. I was at.
It just looks like it.
Yeah, it looks like it. Like everybody's young. Like, hey, I work for Pete.
I'm tipping on 50.
You know, I was at NRB and Phil Cook was talking about creativity, and he said creativity does not end with age.
No.
You can have a 7-year-old that's still as creative. He said, and also he said, you know, creative people have to give them a deadline because otherwise they will not get anything done. So it's really interesting to come to your offices and see all these young people, and they're all busy. They're working.
Yeah.
So when did you come to Christ?
So actually, 1986 at Crossroads in Corona.
Oh.
Yeah. So it was when we were poor, and my brother Mel, he followed a girl into at high school into a Bible study, and so he was like the whole flirt to convert thing worked with him, and then he invited me to church, and at first I was like, I really don't care, but then I there's actually a bigger story there, and seeing his transformation was a key part of it. But the fun part is I like to talk about, man, they had free food. So I was like, dude, they had free pizza, and for a kid when I didn't have, literally we were going to school, and I don't know. What happened to us then nowadays with Child Protective Services and stuff like that, it's amazing. Yeah, because my mom, she went to take a job down in downtown LA, and we grew up basically kind of latchkey kids. Yeah, my mom would go to work on Monday, stay out in LA till Saturday, come home Saturday afternoon, pay all the bills on Sunday, cook food for us, go back to work on Monday. And we were like 12, 14, 16 years old at home alone with no parental supervision. It was really a miracle, and God kind of brought us into a local church. And I would go to school with no lunch money, and it was before we were on the lunch program and stuff. So I was so happy when we started getting the free lunches. But yeah, when I found out I could go to a Bible study and get pizza or M&Ms, I showed up for the food.
Pastors listening,
yeah.
This is true. This is real. Wow. That's amazing. I mean, for you to get to where you're at right now, that is amazing. That's the American dream story.
It is. It's God's providence. Yeah, and that was really actually going back to why we started the studio. So what happened was Doug Hewson went into ministry full time and kind of handed me the reins of Thinkware, and it was a pastor friend who really challenged me one day. I remember after I got married, I got back from Europe. My wife and I went there, and he's like, "How's it going?" I'm like, "Oh, it's amazing. Financially set, all this stuff, whatever." And he's like, "Wow, is it all about you?" I'm like, I thought it was. That's God's providence. And he really challenged me, and he said, I am where I am in life because of godly men like Doug Hughes and Terry Foster, Jim Evans, who really kind of spoke into me and taught me what it was to be a godly man, a godly husband, a godly business owner. Mm-hmm. And who was I pouring into? Who was I encouraging? And right after that, shortly thereafter, is when Mike Foster and Mel had the idea to start this little design studio. And I really saw it as an opportunity to bring on younger guys and interns and mentor them and grow them up. And then the first full-time guy, Richard's still at the studio today. The first full-time intern to leave didn't leave us. He became full-time with us, but till after 5 years.
That speaks volumes of how you guys do your business. Yeah. And I know you help a lot of churches. I've been to mega churches. I'm the comedian. I speak at them, and I see, they know you guys, and the design probably of the church was made by you guys.
Yeah, and it's hard to say. I mean, we've worked with over 600 ministries, churches over the last 18 years. But yeah, some of the largest in America, including like Saddleback, Crossroads, was it Life Church? We just did. But now but it's always hard to say stuff like that because then, because people go, "Oh, you guys did everything." We didn't do everything. We did relatively small part. But yeah, we definitely have a lot of favorites, and I hate to, but it's fun.
What ticks you off about churches? What gets you angry?
Oh man,
hey, this is real show. That's what we pride ourselves. We, this is something you won't say at a Christian radio show, but we can say it here on the podcast.
Yeah, you know what? definitely. Yeah. Well, first off, I'm illiterate, so I learned how to. I grew up on sight reading, so I'm terrible with phonics. So my son always makes fun of me because I remember I was reading something the other day and I said pterodactyl, and he's like, "What?" It was pterodactyl, but there's a B in front of it. So, but it always takes me a minute to catch on. But complacency is definitely something. I always mess up on that word, complacency.
Complacency.
Because I wanted to say their compliance. But just that the church. They become complacent in what they're doing. And I think what breaks my heart with a lot of churches is they're stuck on a hamster wheel, that repeats every week, 7 days a week, every Sunday. It's about producing this worship service, which is great. But the thing is, I mean, the church is not the building. It's not that event on Sunday. I mean, the church 200 years ago was the center of creativity. It was the center of community. It was the hospitals. It was the orphanages. It was the schools. The church was the hope for the world. I believe that. And we've allowed the church to get boxed into something that the U.S. federal government has deemed as a nonprofit, meaning we don't make money. And that's completely not what a nonprofit is. It means you don't exist just to make a profit. You still have to make a profit to keep the doors open, but you don't have to pay taxes on it. So they confuse a tax status with their actual mission and goal. And they're on this bent of reinventing the wheel every week. And when we talk about creative organizations, like I don't know of any creative organization, whether you call it Disney, Universal, any TV show, they all go in seasons. They all take breaks. A lot of times they understand the Sabbath better than the church does. But I think a church that's complacent with where they're at and where they're at creatively, where they're at telling their story, whether what they're doing week in, week out, and they might kind of like raise a flag, but taking a step back and kind of remembering what their story is and trying to be intentional about that is probably one of the things I'm really.
That's right, because earlier we were talking during the Renaissance. The biggest thing was when we were in Europe, we were in France and London and Italy. Everything is about Jesus. Jesus is on the wall, not in the hearts, but on the walls and the statues, all about Jesus, and that's true. That's telling the story was beginning. Now you guys work with Disney, and you said you work with aerospace company and large companies, and sometimes when you go and do a design or do building, you spend probably weeks with these people. Do you try to share your faith? Do you feel? Do you? How would you do it?
So actually, one of my favorite clients right now is actually Museum of the Bible in Washington, D.C.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, and it's a fantastic organization. I think, the premise behind it, and really there's a lot of different supporters, but really one of my favorite things about it is that it's this idea that the Word of God is a double-edged sword, and it can stand and defend itself. And they've created a place where the kind of the facts of the Bible are laid out. So you're talking about Jesus is everywhere in the Renaissance and in Europe. Same thing with Washington D.C. They have a going through our godly heritage and understanding the underpinning of what we know is today as freedom, the facts that we've been able to break out of the bonds of slavery and racism and a lot of these. It all comes back to these biblical principles and Christians that help fight for those things. It's kind of hard. It's easy to kind of look back and be like, hey, it's the sins of the father that caused the havoc, and we have to do everything we can to correct it now. That's kind of when I saw Frozen 2. That's kind of what I thought of. It was her grandfather, and all she had to do was break the dam. That was it. Everything was good. The reality is, though, that the opportunity for the Bible to stand on its own at the Museum of the Bible, it creates a place where it's non-evangelical. It's not about proselytizing and say, hey, now you have to accept Christ. They're actually opening their doors, and they're finding that not only Christians come there, but whether it's Christians or Catholics, but then Jewish, Muslim, atheists come there to check out, okay, so what is this about? And it actually allows a dialogue to happen. And when I look at the way Jesus did ministry, he didn't always go up to everyone says, okay, repent and be baptized. That was John the Baptist.
Yeah.
But the idea that he came alongside different people, and I think Colossians 4:5-6 tells us that speak with wisdom towards outsiders. And I think when we work with different organizations, there are times to share our faith with them, but there are times when our actions speak louder than words. And really, that's what they're looking at. So even within our organization, I carry my faith very strongly. There are people who are not believers in our studio, though, and we don't hold anything against them. And if anything, I'd say they hold us to a higher standard, because even when it comes to software licensing, they want to make sure, like, hey, you guys are compliant, right? You're not doing any software pirating, or anything.
Right.
And it is, and it's amazing how many times then they look at other people with a label of Christian that says, oh, just give us a copy of that song, or just use that, or just plagiarize that. That's okay, and to them it's okay because they're doing it for the church, but it's the non-believers that actually cause us to stand out. But I always just try and make sure I'm aware of the opportunities to share my faith and to do it in love, and I definitely am one. Not to, Chuck Boer is he's our senior pastor now.
Yeah.
He was my youth pastor back when I was in junior high school and stuff like that. And I think he taught me a phrase back then, or not a phrase, or just a value in work. And because I couldn't sing, I'm not a speaker. I really don't like doing stuff like this. But I remember talking to him once about the worship team and just expressing that, and how do we I'm not an evangelist and stuff, and he said, man, here, your work is your worship. Yeah. And how I work and how I reflect that is how I worship and bring glory to God and those things. So that's something that's really always struck with me. So I even look at how I share my faith. It is how do I honor my family, how do I honor my wife, and how do I talk about them and celebrate those things, how do I honor my God. I try to keep those in line, if that makes sense. So.
Now, if there's a woman listening right now, she's like, okay, I'm a stay-home mom, or I'm single or something. I'm not creative whatsoever, and I would like to be more creative. What do you tell her?
Oh, man.
What can she do?
Is
there something she can do?
Yeah, I think women, especially if they're stay-at-home moms, I mean, there's creativity all around them. I think most of them, and that's what strikes me. I think most of them are really creative because you have to be flexible with the changing dynamics of the health of your kids and the activities that they're in. How do you juggle things? I think the biggest thing I would encourage them is that idea of seeking fellowship. Discipleship, having mentors, and being plugged into community is the biggest thing. Because I'd say with the stay-at-home moms specifically, or even just women in general, or even men, I think culturally we've become so disconnected, and we try to be independent. Mm-hmm. And I am where I am today because of the community around me. Not to be coy about it takes a village to raise people, but I think God's plan was that. But I would just encourage them to collaborate, work with other people, like help other moms, or anything they can do that, and then to serve like you need to be served. But yeah, I don't know.
But I mean, there's like books they can read, websites, blogs they can do to go to learn. Oh, I can start creating stuff.
Yeah, you know what? Yeah. Offhand, like my things are pretty random. But I would say start with the Enneagram. I think being start with yourself and understand what motivates you, because
that's very good.
Because the idea of creativity is very personal. And when so we're a licensed architectural firm. Architects during the Renaissance, they were not just the building makers. They made the furniture. They did the sculptures. They did a lot of different things. Leonardo da Vinci was pretty broad. Same thing with moms. I think inherently they do a lot of different things, but they need to understand themselves first. I think, mm-hmm. and their ability to get along either with their husbands and their kids and everything like that. But I would start with the Enneagram first, and then branch out from there. And I think understanding your own unique personality will inherently cause you to be creative, and creativity for creativity's sake is, it's divergent thinking. It's thinking outside the norm. So I think knowing that you can't just always copy what everyone else is doing. There's a funny pastor story out there.
Go ahead.
About the young couple gets married. The husband walks in, and the young wife is sitting there getting ready to cut the turkey to stuff it, and she just cuts the turkey in half. And he's like, what the heck what are you doing? And she's like, well, I'm getting the turkey ready. This is the way my mom taught me. And he's like, that's the craziest thing. So her mom comes over later in the day, and she asks her mom, hey, Mom, why do we cut the turkey in half, to stuff it? And she's like, I don't know. That's the way Grandma taught me. And then a little bit later, Grandma comes over for dinner, and she goes, Grandma, why do we cut the turkey in half? And she goes, oh, in 1945, the turkey wouldn't fit in the oven unless we cut it in half.
Oh.
And it was just we copy things, and we do these things thinking that that's what will be helpful. It's, oh, so-and-so does it, and that's, I'll just keep doing that. But the reality is understanding what motivates you, what works for you, is really the best thing that you can do. And I'd say the most important thing with creativity is just, not doing the same thing over and over and again, expecting different results, because that's the definition of insanity.
I appreciate your time, and I know your time is very valuable, so I'm going to cut it short. to get you back. But let's say you're doing a design work and you're there with a big executive from Disney who's not a Christian, not at all. They know how good your work is. They know how would you share Jesus with them? And you have that 2 minutes to talk to them.
Well, I mean, honestly, my first thing is to pray for God to open the door. And a real example is basically it wasn't a super high level person within the Disney company, but it was just acting with integrity, acting with faith. Words are one thing, actions are another, and just trying to be kind and loving to them, not judgmental, because I don't know where they have been. And later on, after that meeting closed out and the doors were shut, they approached us and says, "Hey, do you have time to talk later and actually dive deeper?" Because it was actually a more sensitive thing. And then what ended up happening is another executive came up to us that was a believer and was like, "Man, they've been like waiting for years and been praying for this to happen, or just opportunities to open up." But I think being sensitive to the calling of the Spirit is really, for me, my biggest thing. I'm not an evangelist. I know there are some people who have that kind of bold faith that they just start sharing it, and God bless you. That's the thing. But again, that's that creative divergent thinking. It's like, but with that said, there are times when I'm sitting on an airplane and I feel like I'm sitting next, and I've sat next to an executive before, and God compels me to put on my heart, "Hey, so what's your church background?" And then I'll start sharing through that, because that's actually a relatively safe question of what their church background is. And they go, "I have none," or "I hate church," or whatever it is. And God has put that on my heart. And there have been times when I've been sitting in meetings and I'll feel that nudge on it, and I'll lean into that. But that's definitely case by case basis.
That's awesome. I appreciate your time. Plain Joe is amazing. If you're a business owner, or if you're a nonprofit executive, or even go into Plain Joe website and see all the great things that they do, and different from design to your entire building or entire company and design, to websites, to other stuff that they do. So what is the website they can go to?
Yeah, actually, so plainjoestudios.com is our main one, especially faith-based stuff. On the theme entertainment side of things and kind of more museum work is Storyland Studios.
Storyland Studios. And now you were working on a project. You went to Israel, and you guys had cameras, special cameras. And you did this. Tell us quickly about it, or where can people watch that?
Yeah, so actually at the Museum of the Bible, we have a virtual reality experience, the lands of the Bible.
Oh, you guys did that for the Museum of the Bible?
Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah,
okay, so when they go to the museum and you see that real life experience, that's the work of Pete Mcgowen and his team.
Yeah, well, it was bigger than that. There's a group called OVRX. They're the guys we teamed up with to help pull the technology pieces and everything like that together. But and then it was a partnership with Museum of the Bible to help pull that. It was great.
Last question.
Yeah.
What's the trendiest color right now today?
Well, what's the trendiest what?
Color.
Oh man, it's black. It's always black.
It's always black. That's my favorite. Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Because it doesn't really matter the color. It's what your story. What story?
Okay, that's true. That's true.
Don't be trendy.
So thank you guys so much for listening, and thank you, Pete, for being with us. Pete Mcgowen, Plain Joe Studios, and next week I'm gonna be in Hawaii. I will be trying to have a podcast with Jensen Franklin, John Bevere, Phil Laboratory, and Bob Harrison. So we'll be doing, so we might not go live on Monday, but we will be recording this and putting them on Facebook and others. If you're listening and you enjoy these things, please go to laughterforallpodcast.com, or just on any podcast channel, just subscribe to Laughter for All podcast. I'm Comedian Nazareth. Please, until next week, find something, keep laughing. Don't shake hands with people, just elbow them right now because of the corona thing. But love you guys, thank you, and we'll see you later.